All right, welcome back. I'm with Lena Franklin. She is a mindfulness-based psychotherapist, a spiritual teacher and speaker based here in Atlanta, right?
Yes, that's right.
We are back at the Attune Conference in Serimbe. I can never get that word right. I can't speak. But this is a beautiful place. It's a beautiful surrounding. It's a beautiful weekend. And uh, talk about the importance of weekends like this from your experience. You speak all over the world. You speak at these conferences. Why are they important? Uh,
So, really, in my mind, the power of events like this is bringing collective intention together. So we, can easily have a yoga practice or meditation practice or be committed to presence in our day-to-day lives. But when there's a large group of people that comes together in collective intention, it literally shifts the energetic makeup of the world, the universe. So it's shifting the frequency
right.
through the power of the mind and through intention. And I think that's a very revolutionary process. So Attune is all about that. Practicing these practices in service of humanity and the greater good.
Talk about your journey. I found your story really interesting. Uh, Immigrant mother,
Yeah.
uh, engineer father,
Psychologist.
psychologist. That's right.
Yeah.
Right. Psychologist father. Um, that's a interesting mix.
Totally. Very interesting. So my mom, who passed about 12 years ago, she was from Vietnam and was the only person in her family to immigrate to the U.S. And she came here in 75 from Laos.
Right.
And my father from Georgia, kind of good old Southern boy, grew up, Stanford law dropout, turned psychologist. And so there was this really interesting East-West Presbyterian Buddhist hybrid house.
That's a
Huge contrast. But for me, what that gifted me was this kind of interesting embodiment of East and West in all different ways, in food, in spiritual practice, in kind of this cocoon of acceptance and altruism and compassion. And so, just through my upbringing, there was this kind of underlying current that, at the core, there's so many more common denominators that we have and that we possess versus differences that we have. And so it was very rich and never a dull moment. Like one Sunday I would go to Presbyterian church with my dad and be with my pastor, and then the next Sunday I would go to Buddhist temple with my mom and like chant with the monks, and eat vegetarian food. And so it
so
was,
they never changed their
no.
they
Yeah.
okay.
They each kept their the spirituality they came into the marriage with. And just occasionally, one would skip to come, but it was a very accepting dynamic, which was beautiful. At the time, I thought it was a little weird that my mom would go and wear monk's robes and chant, but now I realize how beautiful and powerful it was.
And, well, how spiritual she must have. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
and strong really to keep that identity.
Yes.
I mean, that's what I would have taken from that is wow, she was brave enough to say I'm going to stay who I am and
Right.
not adopt this other spiritual practice that's interesting. How do you think that all shaped who you are today?
Well, it shaped, basically every aspect. So, my mom, you talk about courage and being who you are. She was like the antithesis of your kind of submissive Asian woman. She was this feisty tiger mom, and, she was all about working hard and really pouring energy into things and projects and relationships that you really believed in. And there's this kind of inner grit and survival instinct that I have around that. It can kind of malfunction at times when I overwork myself. But she used to say that, and I didn't know what this meant at the time, but she used to tell me, you are meant to bring people to the East to learn about my culture. And
That's interesting.
yeah, I didn't know what that meant, but now I realize she kind of had this sight and this vision, and she knew, she actually knew that she was going to pass early. And so she saw that. And so she kept planting those seeds. And, through the cultural upbringing of, being in a Buddhist Christian home and having, family altars all over the home with incense and pictures of ancestors and lots of ritual. I think that really impacted the way that now I live my life with a lot of ritual, with a lot of commitment to cultivating compassion and seeing the commonalities between people.
How did you get to the point where you understood what you wanted to do, what your calling was, I guess, and the best way to put it? But because I think your spiritual practice and everything influences your work. I mean, tremendously. Talk about that a little bit, because I'm always curious how people land where they land and how they end up where they end up, and because I think that's really interesting.
For me, it was so much the experience of my mom's death, and
Really?
it was like the darkness and the suffering, processing it. She died very unexpectedly from a stroke at the age of 57. I was in my first year of grad school, learning to become a licensed clinical social worker. And it was through the existential questioning and through the grief processing. And really, that was when I came back to some of the meditations that she taught me initially. And so it was her teaching that created the spaciousness to allow me to feel and see that my dharma, my purpose, was to really help people. And then part of that healing and helping people had to do with teaching them some ancient Eastern practices to help them become empowered to heal themselves. So it was really like through my kind of microcosm of healing that allowed me to see, okay, this is meant to flow through me, to share it with others in the ways that I'm guided to. So it was really through the darkness.
That makes sense. What is mindfulness-based psychotherapy? What is that?
So psychotherapy, in essence, is mindfulness-based because it's all about being present with the other person. But the way that I kind of allow mindfulness-based psychotherapy to flow through me is not only is it the presence-based relationship building of the psychotherapy dynamic, but it's also offering clients mindfulness tools, whether that's mindful belly breathing, creating a sankalpa or an intention, different ways that someone can manage their energy, and to use different breath work techniques. It's giving someone tools that are presence-based in order for them to take control of their own healing and happiness. And so it's an integration of traditional talk therapy and then experiential practices that I share and offer. So it's very integrative.
What is I write for business publications, and I write about business and leadership and management, and you hear a lot today about mindfulness, and you hear a lot today about you should be mindful, but I guess here at Attune this weekend we all probably get that a little bit more,
right?
But I think in general, what does it mean? Like, what is mindfulness when you it may be in a business context, but just in what does it mean? What is that?
Well, I love that you asked that because I actually work with a lot of corporations and executives to create mindful leadership programs and mindfulness-based programs for their companies. And put simply, mindfulness is a practice of meeting the moment with presence of mind. So I'm here with you, I'm seeing your presence, your eyes. So it's a way to meet life differently, training the mind to be in the now. And it's a practice because it's not possible for the mind to be in the now constantly just because of the way that we're wired. But it becomes what I would call an aspirational practice, because the more present we are in our bodies, the more attuned we can be to what our employees need, or that nonverbal cue that I saw in that person in that meeting, or what I need. Perhaps I am not attuned to some of the needs that are coming up psychologically, emotionally, physically. So it's a way of living. It's a path, and it really creates a perspective on life where we're embracing life as a living meditation.
So it's different. I put it in context. It's different than emotional intelligence. In other
Yes.
words. Much
Yes.
different.
Much different. Yeah.
Okay.
I think emotional intelligence, I would put that under the umbrella of mindfulness, of
Okay.
presence.
That's
Yeah.
where if you had to
Yeah.
sort of
If you
put
had to
it-
like categorize them, it would go underneath.
Okay.
But there's so much that can go underneath that umbrella.
What's the I think I could answer that, but I want to ask you, what's the benefit then of thinking of it from a management or a business or leadership standpoint, of trying to have and be more mindful, and you know, put integrating that into a culture or building that into a company culture. What do you see the benefits of that?
Well, kind of on a macro perspective, people are going to be happier. They're going to experience more contentment, joy, happiness. They're going to become less sick, you know, whether we're talking psychological illness or physical illness. So mindfulness reduces inflammation in the body, which is very powerful. They're going to be more productive. There's going to be an increase of focus, both individually and collectively. And those are just kind of some of the few primary benefits of mindfulness.
Why do we fight it?
Well, I think we're wired to fight it because we're wired to attach to comfort and pleasure and avoid discomfort. And mindfulness, in essence, requires us to lean into the discomfort. Because in order to see some of the default modes of our thinking, we have to acknowledge that we're thinking those thoughts. You know, if we're thinking
Right.
like, oh, I'm not good enough.
Makes you vulnerable.
Makes you vulnerable, or I am overweight, or whatever it is. You know, we have to be courageous enough to see those thoughts in order to even think about changing them. And humans are not wired to lean into discomfort. It's something we have to intentionally do.
How do you get to the point where you free yourself up to do that? What kind of work do you have to do on yourself to get to that point?
I'd say the number one ingredient is willingness, and well, maybe two, willingness and motivation to live life differently. So fortunately, unfortunately, most of the clients that I see in my practice that are now willing to embark on that process are going through significant suffering, pain, or change in their lives. But before you get to that point, you can embrace that intention and, again, motivation, willingness, and dedication to daily practice, whether that looks like sitting meditation, whether it's weaving different practices in throughout the day, really excavating some of those default modes of thinking that don't serve you.
I see that a lot in my coaching. I see that a lot of people, they've seemingly got the money, they've been successful, but they wake up and they say something's missing. And I'm sure you experience a lot of that. That's when they come. That's when they start.
When they come.
That's when
yeah,
they come.
That's
right.
when they sit on the couch.
And you don't know. And you often, when you get to that point in your life, I remember that point in my life, you struggle to know what to do next, what to do about it. What can people do about it? I mean, where do you start? I mean, with all the books and all the material out there, it's a little bit overwhelming when when you know that there's something missing. You want to find it, you want to fix it, because that's your personality. Where do you start? Like, what's next when you come to that realization? What do you see as the next step in that self-discovery process?
Sure. So, put simply, it's awareness of misalignment. So, if this is how you're living your life, and this is how you want to feel on a day-to-day basis, on average, we can't feel joyful every moment.
No, it'd be boring if we did.
Right, I mean, completely boring. What is that gap? What's the misalignment? What are the actions and thoughts that we're choosing that block our optimal self? And so if we can very objectively see what those elements are, we can begin systematically working on them.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. What meditation? That's another thing that we talk a lot about.
Yes.
And I know it's a big part of your practice. Is it something we can just start doing ourselves? Do we need a teacher? Do we need, again, there's a ton of information out there. how does it help us? How does it, the results that you've seen in your practice, the transformation that you've seen in people? Talk about that a little bit.
So, there's so much information and articles about the benefits of mindfulness and meditation. But what I'm seeing kind of on a really big scale in all different kinds of people in my practice is that people are seeing where they're abandoning themselves.
Okay.
Meaning, again, the way that they're living their life. Is that a piece of their conditioning that's fueling those choices? Is it because they're afraid? Is it fear that's holding them back? So they begin to see the truth of who they are at the core, what they desire, what brings them joy and motivation and love and creativity, and where they may be abandoning themselves with the actions that they're choosing. So that's kind of like the very macro, high level experience that I'm witnessing with clients. And below that, because they're able to see that, it's because they've experienced less stress from meditation, less kind of catastrophic thinking, less distraction. They're clearing the space in order for them to really come back home to who they truly are. So it's really a self-discovery process.
Okay.
And anyone can cultivate a practice, and you don't have to have a teacher, although I would recommend it just because it can be helpful to process what's coming up.
Right.
Because if you have a dedicated practice, inevitably some of that trauma and those repressed energies and those emotions will arise.
I, so if I wanted to find a teacher, how do I find one, and how do I know it's a match?
Yeah.
Because there are different types of meditation and there are different practices. How do you find that match? Or is it really an experimentation to find? I mean, is it?
Well, I think in terms of finding goodness of fit, and I tell my clients all the time, that's the main key, when you're
Right.
first coming in, and you may need to try different people initially. But if you think of meditation as a house, and there are different doors into that house. There's yoga, there's breath, there's spirituality, there's more of a kind of traditional, like secular mindfulness. Notice what really draws you in. There's neuroscience. What interests you? What piques your curiosity and your excitement? And then search for a teacher that's within that realm and
Okay.
see.
And there are groups I know that you can join to get started.
Yes.
To at least learn some of the basics. And,
Right.
I always found like it's useful to do it in a group when you get started, because there's so much more energy. There's
Yes.
there's an interesting energy when you do it in a group
Right.
versus maybe by yourself or. But what's your thought on? Because I think you can do that no matter where you are. There are probably groups everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would recommend if you are serious about cultivating a practice that you alternate between your own individual practice and then group practice in what I would call a sangha, the community of spirits coming together in a collective intention. So absolutely, the energy of a group meditating is palpable and much different than when you're sitting by yourself. I love it. It's like, and then it kind of keeps you accountable too.
Right.
There's a settling in that can happen that's a little bit more easy to settle into than when you're trying to break yourself away from work to meditate at home.
It's kind of like me with working out and exercising. I have to not trick myself, but I have to I have to actually do it in a group.
Yeah,
Because it makes me want to go participate and forces me to do that, and I think that's fine. I think the same way with meditation. I think it's an accountability thing, right? If there's a group that you're supposed to go to and be part of, you're more inclined to do it. I think, but at least that's the way I do it myself.
Yeah.
But what do you think about online? Like, are there communities where this is really effective online to do meditation and learn and maybe work with a coach? I don't know if you do work with people online, like video.
I do,
or
yeah. So I haven't done a group kind of meditation experience online, but I do work with people individually through, virtual sessions for meditation coaching and mindfulness instruction. But yeah, absolutely. I think it's access. You can access different teachers online that you're not in the physical vicinity with, and that's really powerful. I'm kind of old school. I love like the physical presence.
Right.
I prefer that, but I think it's a great second option.
Okay. Particularly if you don't have access to
Yeah, especially if you don't have access and you're more in a more remote area and that sort
Okay.
of thing.
What is, I wanted to ask you, um, you, you're doing some work around impermanence and death. What is that?
So
And why? Is it because of your mother or?
yeah,
Okay,
I
sorry.
think it's developed. It's kind of evolved since my mom died, and you know, death is such a taboo topic in our society, and we aren't taught to honor death. We're actually taught to fight it. We're conditioned to, fight death, fight aging, all of these things, rather than embrace the truth of our impermanence. And one of the only truths in this universe is that everything comes together and breaks apart. And so I really feel called and passionate about the topic of death and impermanence, and fully believe that if we can truly own that part of our existence, like that's a truth, and we can integrate that into our being, that we will feel less angst and less anxiety and stress in our waking life when we are alive here on this earth. And to live well also means to die well. And death and impermanence can give us a sense of urgency to live in alignment with our truth, our intentions, our heart. And I saw that a lot. I see that a lot in my practice, and I also have lived it. That the trauma of losing my mom so suddenly, and she was my primary attachment parent, so it was a big shift. But that loss allowed me to see the power of suffering. And again, if we lean in, we can embrace something like the truth of impermanence more fully.
Do you think that we live our lives really with that in the back of our heads? And what, I mean, I'm just trying to, in my own context, think about it. I don't think about death very often. My own death, anyway.
Yeah, sure,
It doesn't, it's not something that I worry about too much. Is that uncommon?
I would say that's a more evolved place. But
Is it? Okay.
yeah, but I would say too, in that same breath, that our fear around death and our mortality is definitely more on the subconscious level
Okay.
for most people. So we're not always aware of the dynamics that come up.
How does it manifest? How does that manifest itself? Then?
Well, we can look at the anti-aging industry.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
So things like that, or insurance, life insurance.
I interrupted you.
Yeah,
so
yeah, no. So I think it manifests in different ways that we're not even aware of, and we're constantly clinging to a sense of permanence, and even think about the way that we grieve, on the side of a deathbed of a loved one, like begging them to stay, when actually when their soul leaves the body, it's the greatest liberation. So just how we sit with that process of dying and aging.
Is it also accepting? Is all part of this? Is accepting the pain or accepting that you're going to grieve? I mean, what's the once somebody dies? What's the grieving? What is that in terms of the process?
Yeah.
I know there's a process to grieving, and I know there's a process to it, but
I would say to embrace the pain, to host it in your body, to host it in your mind, because pain is.
what do we do then? I mean, do we not do that now?
Well, I think we do some, but I think there's a propensity to really numb and keep ourselves busy, so we don't necessarily feel that pain in the ways that our psyche needs to in order to fully process. So, it's like, okay, I grieved this person for a few days, now I'm back to work, that sort of thing. So really cultivating, if possible, the spaciousness to be with the pain, because pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And suffering is, the way that our mind interfaces with pain and perpetuates it.
What should that grieving process look like then?
So I think
if you totally embrace it.
Yeah, so I think it's different for everybody. And it's very wave-like. So what I recommend to clients is to create space every day to sit with it, to sit with and to feel the energetic and emotional currents of the sadness, to write about it, to explore, visions and images and thoughts and emotions, and to really be curious about what it feels like. There's a curiosity aspect that I think is really important. And to honor, that person has always, has imprinted their being and their presence on our lives, and to honor that. So it's not just about sitting in the sadness and feeling it and moving through it, but it's an honoring too.
Is that the same process we should go through with any kind of change or loss?
I would say yes, especially if it's significant, whether it's divorce or, losing a job or, having a huge life shift. Absolutely, yeah. And it'll feel different, but there should be spaciousness for it.
Okay, that's that's fascinating, and I think I could talk about that for a long time. What you're working on a book? Mm-hmm. You want to tell us about it?
Sure, yeah. So, in essence, the book is all about the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism, and breaking down the Four Noble Truths into really more modern mindfulness philosophies and techniques. So there are some portable practices that I will put in at the end of every chapter, so people can begin to really adopt some of these ancient Eastern practices into their day-to-day life in an easy to implement way. So to kind of demystify some of this Buddhist psychology.
I'm always curious. How does that integrate? Because I mean, and do you get pushback with people who are religious or have other religious beliefs? Do you get pushback on how to integrate these sort of ancient ways and teachings with sort of other people's, spiritual or religious beliefs?
Yeah, absolutely. I practice in the South, and in my office I have, an altar with different Buddhas and stuff. But I do get pushback. But I always like to offer some education around the fact that, Buddha energy is the same as Christ energy.
Yeah.
For example, it is. It's like one of the first books that my parents gave me. Same premise. And one of the first books that my parents gave me in high school was Living Buddha, Living Christ from Thich Nhat Hanh.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So that was a really great foundational book. And again, attending to the common denominators versus the differences. And that Buddhist psychology is a philosophy in which we can walk through the world differently. It's a philosophy for life, not necessarily a religion. And if we embrace it in that way, then we can, integrate it into Judaism and Christianity and whatever it is that we practice.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. This has been
you.
fascinating. When's the book? When do you think you'll have it out?
So I am anticipating the beginning of 2021.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have about a year.
Okay. Well, we'll wait.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned.
We'll wait, and maybe we have you on the lunchtime program.
Would love to.
When it does come out, and so you can talk about it.
Great.
Because it sounds like a really fascinating premise.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us here at Attune in Serenbe. Is that right?
Serenbe.
Serenbe.
You're like close. You're very close.
Serenbe, Georgia. I've been messing that up all weekend. I think I've said it 15 different ways.
It's all good.
But anyway, thank you for joining us. We'll be back here in just a few minutes with another live LinkedIn Live program. Thank you.